So it gives me a big honor to say, give a big welcome to Start Making Sense.
Alright, hey everybody. So it looks like the skeptical heretic has thrown in the towel. I am the victor. I am claiming victory. He has given up. He has rage quit.
And it's getting to the point where I'm starting to do the sort of trolly shit that some of the people engaged in this conversation have been doing, and that's not the way this conversation should be had. And so I respectfully bow out.
He won't respond to my question about what page number does Cavalli Sforza mention 213 clients. He will not answer that. He will not answer what specifically did Dawkins retract in the Ancestor's Tale. And where does he retract it or walk back from it specifically? He will not answer that. He said that the quotation that I read from was retracted, and then the link he sent actually confirms the quotation, and he restates it even more strongly than the quotation that I initially read. And then he also played this weird head game where he said he was fucking with us by pretending to quote mine, but he wasn't really quote mining, to prove that I didn't read it, which is weird because, I mean, I did read the chapter. I went down to the library specifically to read it and to read about race and stuff like that.
Which is funny because that's something that you needed to be taught. But it looks like you learned the lesson, so good work. You caught my clever ploy to fuck with you. Libertarian realist, maybe you didn't get it, but if you noticed, I kind of did that very selectively, just to see if Start Making Sense had actually read the material, which he hadn't.
So that's weird. So I did give my core argument, which is that there's the correlation structure of data of multiple variables of racial characteristics when taken into account all at the same time does give rise to the distinct clusters, which can be correlated to the major racial groups. As far as I can tell, Skep never responded to that at all. That's my whole argument, and he hasn't even responded to that. He focused on a couple minutiaes and got sidetracked quite a bit. But he never actually responded to my core argument, the papers that I cited that support that argument, the papers that I linked to him, I sent to him.
So that's going to be the crux of my argument, is that you have to look at more than one variable at a time. Edwards demonstrates that when we look at multiple variables all at the same time, we see that Lewontin is totally wrong. Studied were independent, which they are not. So that's the crux, again, that's the crux of my argument. Lewontin's conclusion, Edwards continues, is unwarranted because the argument ignores the fact that most of the information that distinguishes populations is hidden in the correlation structure of the data and not simply in the variation of the individual factors. However small the racial partition of total variation may be, if such racial characteristics as there are highly correlate with other racial characteristics, they are by definition informative and therefore of taxonomic significance. And he emphasizes, like I said, you have to look at the correlation. A couple other studies, there's a study done in 2005 by Hua Tang, where he and others examined over 300 genetic markers of over 3,000 individuals to determine race. In his paper, Genetic Structure, Self-Identified Race and Confounding in Case Control Association Studies, the study found, quote, nearly perfect correspondence between genetic clusters for major ethnic groups living in the United States with a close to 100% accuracy. Another study by Paschal in 2010 found similar results. Scientists found essentially perfect agreement between 51 self-reported populations of origin and the population genetic structure found using 650,000 genetic markers. Selecting for especially informative genetic markers allowed a reduction to less than 650 while still retaining close to 100% accuracy. Another paper by Rosenberg from 2005, Klein's clusters and the effect of study design on the inference of human populations. Based on cluster analysis, populations do not always vary continuously, and the population genetic structure is consistent if enough genetic markers and subjects are included. Clusters arise not as an artifact of the sampling scheme, but from small, discontinuous jumps in genetic distance for most population pairs on opposite side of geographical barriers in comparison with genetic distance for pairs of the same side. If enough markers, again, same thing, if enough markers are used with a sufficiently large worldwide sample, individuals can be partitioned into genetic clusters that map major geographic subdivisions of the globe with close to 100% accuracy. I have more sources, but we can get into those as the discussion develops. So hopefully you get the point. You have to take more than one variable into account. When you do, you get basically the same half a dozen or so major racial groups, and you can predict these with nearly 100% accuracy.
Now, on the other hand, as far as what he presented, I demonstrated, one, that he was motivated by political correctness, which I demonstrated in my rebuttal. I showed that a lot of things that he was claiming were wrong, such as things that he had said, and he says, I didn't say that, and I will play a clip showing that he did say that, so I was right about what he said, and he was wrong about what he said.
Race is akin to breeds.
No. Race is akin to skin color. Race is actually a reasonable distinction when you look at animals. And the reason why is because the majority of them are constrained by geography.
I showed that he didn't understand what a Klein was because he said that there's not a continuous nature to Kleins and Kleinal variation. He said that ring species have nothing to do with Kleins. They have absolutely nothing to do with Kleins.
No. And this is why I say, like, I can't even talk to you about this, because it has nothing to do with ring species.
From my understanding, there's Deems and there's Kleins. Deems are more discrete, and then Kleins are more continuous, right? You disagree with this?
No.
Okay.
That does not, you don't seem to understand what an ecocline is. Talking about understood clinal variation in genetics, because I don't. But I know how to talk about it.
Later, he's taken these things back, but in the debate from the start, he said it's not. When you can see how he defined a Deem. If you go back and watch, like he
selecting all the people who are left-handed in a particular family. That's the sort of classification where you get in human beings that give you like a Deem.
So he didn't define these terms properly, and he made up a source of 213 Kleins that doesn't exist. So he doesn't really have a real argument. He just has a pretend imaginary argument. So, to talk about the definition video real quick, I did do a definition video, and I defined the terms, which I did define a lot of the same stuff in the definition video is stuff that I read directly to Skep when I first talked to him in Skype the first day I talked to him. And then I did add a few things. And one thing of interest that everyone seems to be focused on is the fact that you can take, if you look at the genetic information, you can predict someone's self-identified sex less accurately than you can predict someone's self-identified race. Now this is a fact, but by this I'm not claiming that there's a bigger genetic difference between sexes than between races. I'm just saying that people's self-identified sex is not always so accurate because there can be XXY and XYY and things like that, and people don't realize that. They don't take that into account. When you look at the genes, you can clearly see that. Now, Hannibal, in one of his recent videos, he brings up skeletal evidence of a similar thing where if you can actually predict a person's self-identified race based on skeletal evidence more accurately than you can predict their sex. So I'm just using that to point out that if you're saying that race isn't a valid biological category, you would almost have to say that sex is also not a valid biological category, which is obviously silly. Okay? Now people have responded to this saying that Sesardic is just a Croatian philosopher who is a homophobe, which of course is the textbook example of the ad hominem fallacy, right? Just because he's a homophobe, if he is, I haven't looked into this, and I don't really care because it doesn't have anything to do with the genetics of race and sex. But even if he is a homophobe and he murdered 100 people for being homosexuals, that doesn't disprove the fact that he said, oh look, here's this study, you know, where it shows this, and you go and read the study and you can see that it's true. So another thing that the true Puka tried to point out was that in the closing of the Sesardic paper, he says, I'm not trying to prove that race exists as a definite thing. I'm merely trying to show that what the people who are race critics are responding to the biological reality of race with straw man arguments. So that was his attempt with the paper, is to show that the responses to things about race are just a straw man argument, and he's trying to clarify those types of things. He collects up a lot of interesting sources and things. Even if he's not a biologist or whatever, he's still providing these sources, and it's a good collection of sources to look into. Now, if the sources are bunk, obviously he's bunk, but that's the point, is that look into the sources, and he's putting forth these positions, these arguments, which is somewhat, this has become somewhat philosophical. If you deny that reality exists, if you're denying that categories can even exist, if you're saying that Australia cannot exist unless you define it mathematically, you're getting into the realm of philosophy. Okay? So it is relevant. As a philosopher, it's relevant. And even if philosophy wasn't relevant, it's still ad hominem. Okay? Just because he's a Croatian or a homophobe doesn't mean that it's not valid. Okay? So Bob Chaos did a video where he responded to my definitions video, where I'm talking about self-identified sex and genetics, and he says, yes, Adam, because someone with a completely different chromosome is genetically closer to me than someone with minor variations in hair type and melanin count. Except, no. Okay, so to clarify, I'm not claiming that the genetic difference is more significant between sexes, within sexes, compared to as between races. Okay, that's not what I'm claiming. I'm claiming that self-identified sex is not as valid as self-identified race because of things like XXY, because of things like XXY and XYY that people are not aware of. So yeah, if anybody wants to carry on with the conversation in round 2 of the debate, we can. I'm declaring victory for round 1 because Skep gave up and rage quit. So, you know, let me know. Please respond to my actual argument if you are interested, and please try to define race yourselves, even though you don't agree with it or believe in it. You know, if you can define, this is what we think it is, and this is why we think it's wrong. I'd like to see someone do that. Okay. I'm not paying any attention to Hannibal. I should clarify in this. Hannibal lied and said that I felt that defining race was not worth my time. Now this is a lie. What I said was Hannibal is not worth my time if he's not going to meet me halfway. And he hasn't met me halfway. He's not responding to a lot of stuff, the comments that I left. He's just making several videos. Like he won't answer me. He's denying my evidence. Before I said that, he was just, I gave him evidence and he denied it, and he said that there isn't any evidence. And I said, come on, if you're just going to pretend that I haven't provided any evidence, you're not meeting me halfway and you're not worth my time. Okay? So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying defining race is not worth my time. I've done it several times. I don't know why people keep forgetting that I keep defining race. I've defined it so many times that it's getting boring. Like, just pay closer attention, okay? Or ask for a definition of race, you know? So there you go. If you guys want to give up, you know, on round 2, then say it. Say you give up. Otherwise, let's continue with the debate in round 2. So until then, see you guys later.
But I think I'm done with this entire conversation and the group of people who want to have it.